Alright, so we got my bearing separator on the pinion shaft here using the hydraulic press. Just kind of press the pinion shaft out. Got these supports here on it, but anyways, you can see it's loose. I just need to get the rest of the way right now. But basically what my plan is, I'm going to reuse this bearing here to set the new ring and pinion. What I'm going to do is once I get this pressed off completely, you take a die grinder and just hone out the inside of it so that it can easily be slid on and off the pinion shaft. That way you don't have to press on and press off the new bearings all the time. You just use that bearing there, and then you can get pretty close. That way it makes it a lot easier for the process to be able to slide the bearings on and off to get close, rather than to press the bearings on and off repeatedly just to try changing the shims or anything. So that's my plan, and that's another reason why I take this bearing off, is make it a lot easier for the reassembly, because honestly it's a lot of guessing. So one thing I was looking at, and I actually did here, is I took the collar off with the actual bearings, rollers, off of this bearing, because I didn't want the collar pushing on the collar here. I wanted the bearing pushing on the bearing housing. So I took that off just to make sure that everything was going to be seating right. And so what I actually did already is I pressed the bearing initially onto the carrier with this bearing press tool, and now I'll switch over to the old bearing that I used the die grinder to open up some more. So basically what I'm going to be looking for is I'll be able to press it down onto here, and I got a gauge over here, so you'll see the difference once it reaches the end. The gauge will have an increase and it'll stop moving, obviously, and you'll be able to tell. So just keep your eyes open, pay attention. You'll be able to see exactly when you should stop. So pulled out my new gear. This is the 373 ring gear here, and I got it onto the carrier now that I got the bearings pressed on. So what you do is you get it lined up as best as you can. You can see that bolt, the thread's right down there through that hole there. Get it lined up, kind of press it on both hands on either side, and it'll pull it up in a little bit, and then you thread a bolt on either side, and don't tighten it like this, just kind of pull it up by hand still. It'll go, but that way you're not going to ruin any of your threads or get it off center or anything like that. But basically you just once you get those two bolts threaded on, you got some thread locker, some red, put it on all the bolts, thread them in. They get tighten them in a star pattern to 55 to 65 foot-pounds is what they say for GM style. So I'm going to go with 55 because these are new bolts, and I got thread locker here. If I was going to be reusing bolts, I would probably go up that 5 or 10 foot-pounds to the 60 or 65, but I'll see how it feels, I guess. But I'm planning on going to that 55 foot-pounds, and it's going to be pretty difficult, I guess, to hold it in place. I'm going to try it just on the toolbox here, and just kind of brace it against my body and tighten it like that. If I can't get it like that, I might need a second set of hands to help hold it in place while I tighten it down. So I've got, here's my pinion bearing. I just got this ground down on the inside, you can see that. But this way it'll just slide right onto the pinion shaft, and it's a little bit tight. It takes a little bit to take it off, but I think that's about perfect. And here's the shim. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure this thickness. You can see this got kind of bent up when I took the bearing off, but I can still measure the thickness of this, because this is a good starting point on where to start for the new shims on the pinion bearing. So I've got this micrometer here, and unfortunately this is in millimeters. I'll have to convert it over, but basically I should be right around 30 thousandths. That was the factory spec. Sometimes I tighten it up, sometimes I loosen it based on the housing, of course, but it's a good starting point on where to go for your new one. So installing my new races on the bearings. So what I've got here, I have a setup. I have a new set of shims. I measured them. I'm going to be off by I think it's like 1 or 2 thousandths. No, not even that. Just 1 thousandths from what the original shim was. So pretty close. I'm going to try it out, see where I'm at. I've got the 2 old bearings. So for the pinion shafts here, got a new race again, and old crush sleeve. So the crush sleeves are pretty much worthless once they've been used, but I'm going to try using it when I put them in my new pinion shaft there, to try to set the pinion depth and everything. So I guess you got to use something to get it set right. So I'm going to try using that old crush sleeve. It should be somewhat close. It's just not going to work anything, you know, high torque or long-term type stuff. So it should work, I think, to just to get everything set right. And then of course once I get everything new installed, I'm gonna have to double check and make sure that everything's right again. So chance it might not work, but it's gonna be a pretty close starting point, so I don't have to reinstall new parts again and again and again. I can just use these old parts and take them off real quick, because again, on this pinion shaft bearing, I have that ground down so I can slide it right on and off. So gonna be a easier, quicker way to get everything kind of figured out and then do the final install. Hopefully only have to do that once. Okay, so ground out my pinion shaft, just pinion shaft bearing a little bit more, the old one, so it slides on real nice. And then you install it. Obviously you don't want to turn this upside down without holding your pinion shaft in place, but basically next you'll install your crush sleeve and your bearing, your outer bearing, and then you have a couple of your washer and the nut. So I ended up using the yoke on this to put onto there, just because it was easy. You know, the yoke lines up right, and that's what it's designed for. And so I just put the pinion nut back on there, and the way I did that is I just used a pipe wrench on the yoke to hold the yoke still while I was tightening up the nut. So that's what you should do, I guess. That's what I use when you're tightening it up, to check the crush bearing or the crush sleeve there play. But it's just an easy way to hold it in place so that you can do it with one person and go a little bit at a time instead of trying to use an impact and just hitting it once and checking and whatnot. So it works pretty well. So right now I'm onto the stage where I get to go and put the carrier into place, and then I'll check out where I'm at. So what I got done here is I'm actually just going to reuse my old shims on the sides, well, because they worked and they were right as far as I know. They aren't damaged or anything, so I'm going to try to reuse them, and if not, I have a new shim pack. I can measure it out and use some new ones. But basically what you do when you're putting these in, you have to angle both of your races on either side. This is too tough to do with the carrier right now, but once I get it kind of lined up, I'll try to get a quick shot of it. But yeah, you just have to get them all angled and lined up, and then you either push it in or give it a bump with like a rubber hammer, rubber mallet, and into place. You throw your caps on and torque it down, and then you can check your play for your pinion shaft, the what am I trying to say, the run out, the backlash of it, and make sure everything's right, and you kind of go from there. So I'll try to get that carrier put in now. Okay, so here's my shot of my carrier here. You can see I got the races angled up, and just kind of lined up straight. Basically you got to get it pushed in tight, and it has to be tight on the side to side, can't have any slop in it at all. And then of course it has to meet the ring gear quite right. It's tough to see that down in there, but it has to meet that quite right, and you're going to see that in your backlash and your ring, your pattern on the gear here. So you can check it so you know that's right, but it's got to be tight first. If there's any side to side slop, add more shims. So my original shims were actually much too wide. As I was going in, I was having to hit it with the hammer quite a bit, or quite hard, and I was looking at a closer investigation. I actually started to cut the shims. Let's see if I can find the mark on it. Oh, it's not going to show. There we go. So I was actually cutting into that. That's not good. Luckily the shim took all the damage, so my race and everything is fine. What I did is I took my new shims. I got these, they're these newer style ones, and they got this ridge on the inside, and that helps to locate your other shims. So they just all lock together like that, kind of hold together a little bit better. So I took a little bit off of each side. They weren't equally balanced, so I'm glad I marked which side was which. Took a little bit off the right, a little bit off the left. Gonna try putting the carrier back in again. Hopefully it's the right thickness this time. So with the carrier in, put the end caps on for the carrier, and you set them and torque them to spec, or I guess the spec is for 60 foot-pounds. What I'm doing is actually going to 50 right now so that I don't stretch the bolts out. So that's all four of them torqued right there, and now I get the fun process of trying to figure out how everything's fitting up. So you can see there's a little bit of backlash in there. I don't know how close that is to spec, so I got my dial indicator here, and then we'll have to of course check the ring pattern, how that's hitting. So that will tell us quite a bit on how far forward and aft the pinion shaft should be and whatnot. So I guess let's get started. Okay, so right here you see my menagerie of dial indicator set up, and you see I got my pipe wrench locked on my yoke right there so that the pinion doesn't gonna turn. But basically what you're gonna do here, and the reason I say menagerie is because I got this whole setup and it kind of moves, so you gotta stay away from touching it and hope that when you get it set it's right. So when you set this, you need to be all the way to one side. So right now I have the pinion pushed as far forward as I can, and I can't get this to set on 0. It likes to move. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna look at right there, right at 11, and here going up to 44. So this is in millimeters. So 11 to 44, so we're talking about 0.33 millimeters. Now I already did the math, and that's 11 to 12 thousandths of an inch. So what the spec calls for is 6 thousandths to 10 thousandths. So what we need to do is increase or decrease the backlash. Actually, we have too much play. So basically what you need to do is you look, you move the ring gear closer to the pinion shaft, you're going to decrease the backlash. So what I need to do is likely take a little bit of shim out of this side and add just a little bit on this side. And when I say a little bit, I think what the spec says is if you move it, I think it's 0.7 or 7 thousandths closer, you increase your backlash by 10 thousandths. Either that or it's the other way around, but it's close to 1-to-1 for how much closer you move it to how much the backlash is. So measure how much shim you take out on one side and how much you put in the other, and keep in mind how much you need to decrease your backlash, and that should get you pretty close. So I double checked, and so if you move 10 thousandths closer, the ring gear 10 thousandths closer to the pinion shaft, you will decrease your backlash by 7 thousandths. 10 thousandths closer, decrease by 7 thousandths. Now if you move 7 thousandths away, you will increase your backlash by 10 thousandths of an inch. Yeah, a little bit confusing, but that's kind of a gauge to go by. You have my shims moved over here now. So what I did is I just took a little bit, like I said, a little bit out of the right, added a little bit to the left, moved the ring gear closer to the pinion shaft. I moved it by right at 10 thousandths of an inch. So I had 13 thousandths backlash. I move it 10 thousandths closer, I should take 7 thousandths backlash off, so I should be right around that 6, which is, you know, the bottom end. So I'm hoping that it's at least at 6, hoping for 7. So basically what we have here, we're sitting right at, looks like 47. Let's try this again. I'm holding the pipe wrench with my foot, so it's not it's not the best way to do this. I already torqued the end caps, and of course you want your dial indicator perpendicular to what you're measuring, but here we go, let's try this. 31 to 46. Well, okay, so I double checked this again, and I got everything tightened up and held the pipe wrench a little bit more solid, and I double checked, and I'm at right between 0.15 millimeters and 0.16 millimeters. Doing the conversion, 0.15 millimeters is 0.0059 inches, so 59 10,000ths, or just under 6 thousandths. Good enough, because on the upper end of this I was at 16.16 millimeters, which would probably be somewhere around that 6.5 thousandths. So I'm going to call that within spec as far as the backlash goes. So as far as the left and right, we're good. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint on the ring gear here with my paint grease there. And so what I'm going to do then is I'm going to turn by the pinion shaft so that it's similar to the situation that I would get while driving. I'm going to turn it in the driving direction, so not that way, that way. That way the pinion shaft is going to be hitting the ring gear how it would be in a normal driving situation. So that's the way that you want to check it, because that's what you're going to see most of the time between this pinion and ring gear. Okay, so what I got here is I painted up my ring gear here. You want to make sure that you paint both sides so you can see what both sides are going to be looking like on the coming side and the going side. So basically then I'm just going to turn it around by the pinion shaft. Alright, so I realize I'm doing 2 revolutions there, but that gets a better impression on there. So what I'm going to be looking at on here is you look at your pattern and see where it's hitting at. So kind of tough to see, but what I'm seeing here is that it looks like it's getting maybe a little bit high on the ring gear, both sides. So it's not, the pinion shaft, what I'm saying, is not coming up far enough into the ring gear. So I think I need to take this back apart, add some more shims to the pinion gear so that it makes more contact here with the ring gear, because I'm not seeing enough contact there. The pattern is hitting up on top of the teeth here on both sides, so need to add more shims to the pinion shaft. Okay, so I got everything back installed. What I did is I just added one. So I'd previously measured all of my shims that came in the pack, and I marked how thick they were. So what I did is I added my thinnest shim to the pinion shaft, and then I came back, put it all together. And so what you're looking for is something about like this, is where you see the contact is not all the way on the top, not all the way on the bottom, but you see a nice contact all the way right in the middle there. Now I was resisting with my hand just so it makes a little bit of a better contact, and it's not really showing that well on the back, but right here on this first one you can kind of see it. Again, on the back side it's showing good contact. Here, I'll try to roll it backwards once and see what comes up. And it looks like it's showing right about the same. Yeah, so basically what I'm saying is I got the pinion depth set how I want it. I got my backlash set how I want it. I'm going to double check that again since I changed my pinion depth, but that should be fine. Next thing to do is take it apart and press the real bearings onto the pinion shaft, or press the first real bearing onto the pinion shaft, and then we'll put the real crush sleeve in and set that. Okay, so now I've got this pinion ready to put this bearing on. Basically what I had to do is I had to find a pipe to go over the pinion shaft to protect that while I'm pressing on this bearing. Basically that's the only way to get this bearing on, is to press it on. And so I had to find a pipe that would fit over the top of the shaft, but I had to turn this down so that the pipe here is only contacting that solid inner ring here and not hitting on this outer ring here. So I was having a bit of an issue getting the new pinion shaft bearing on the front side on. Couldn't get enough room to get the yoke on. So what I ended up deciding was that I could just put the ring gear, the carrier back on, torque this down, and that'll give me a little bit more of a resistance, so I can torque down the pinion shaft. So I should be able to do that. I think, I guess actually for the specs I need to have the carrier off, so I'm gonna end up installing this, getting that initial bearing turned down. I was trying to strong hand it, and I guess I just couldn't get it enough of a grip on it, so I'm just gonna change theories and put this on just enough so that it'll hold it in place, torque that, get the pinion bearing pulled in farther, just enough so I can get the yoke on, and then I can tighten everything down so that I can get that torqued and to spec, and crush the crush sleeve, so I get the right amount of play on it. I think there's a certain number of inch-pounds that you're supposed to see on a continuous motion turning around rotation on the pinion shaft. So I'll have to double check what that is, but that's what I need to get to. So I need to get the yoke on and get the seal installed also. So I had the pinion in there. What I was doing was I was using my impact here to zip down the nut on the yoke there to get a little bit tighter. I had a little bit of a vertical movement before this bearing was touching the race, and I started tightening it down, and I overloaded the crush sleeve here. So how I know that is I was tightening it down, all of a sudden there was no vertical play, and it took, I don't know, it was a little bit of force, but I know it was too much because what the spec calls for is 14 to 19 inch-pounds for a new crush sleeve, new bearings. So basically the crush sleeve comes out and you need to start over with a new crush sleeve. Bearings should be fine, but the crush sleeve needs to be replaced. So keep that in mind as you do yours, so that you don't ruin the crush sleeve. Don't just zip it on with an impact and just keep going. Stop often and check, because you get to that point, you actually start crushing the crush sleeve before the bearing seats, and so once you get to that point, it's just, you're there. It's not a lot of extra movement and you could be overloading it. So I'm gonna have to go to the parts store tomorrow, get a new crush sleeve, and I guess start back at it then.